This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind. For more science-based tips, join Event Psychology Club at eventpsychology.gumroad.com. Also, check out Victoria's online course, Event Psychology Lab, at eventpsychology.thinkific.com, which covers key behavioral science concepts and offers research-backed solutions to your event challenges. This course is a unique opportunity to upgrade your industry skills and gain a competitive edge without adding to your already busy schedule. Now, enjoy the conversation.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. And today is a very special episode, and I have a very special guest, Jeanette Andrews. And Jeanette is a magician. And I think it's very appropriate timing as we approach the most magical season of the year. So Jeanette Andrews is hailed as one of the most innovative illusionists in the world today and has staged hundreds of sold-out and standing room-only performances for Fortune 500 companies, theaters, and universities, including Infinity, Kraft, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Lyric Opera, and Chicago Ideas Week. Jeanette, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking with you.
Right. Jeanette, let's get to it. What is a sensory illusion?
Yeah, so as a bit of backstory, to kind of answer your question in what will at first seem like a roundabout way, so my background is as a technically trained magician. That's what I did my first magic performance for my preschool class when I was 4. I got paid to do a magic performance for the first time when I was 6, and this is the only job I've ever had. So I've just been sleeping, and breathing this my entire life. So I've spent really the whole, really my whole life and the whole early part of my life very involved, in the magic community and, being a magician, which I think people primarily think of as a mainly visual thing. But as somebody who has done this forever, you start to realize that so much of magic is about perception and about kind of the flexibility of our perceptions, which is a really comprehensive experience that really is constituted, you all in events understand this so well. It is our whole experience. And it's the whole context of what we are, kind of immersed in. And so certainly within magic, that involves other things. It involves what you're hearing, both maybe from the sounds the objects are making to what I'm saying versus what other people are saying, to then sometimes the smells that you're experiencing. I've done a lot of magic, especially pre-COVID. I've done a lot of magic exploring scent. And, there's very little previously done of magic using smell. And so, really did a lot with that, as well as also thinking about, how do we feel things? What are the objects, especially used in magic? What do they feel like? And, for example, we all understand, the basic kind of objects around us. I have my phone sitting here, like we all understand, about how much a phone weighs, things like that. So much of magic does really factor in a lot of our other senses to then hopefully make really effective illusions, and to also, kind of point out how vast our sensory perception really is. So I'm also interested in incorporating a lot of other sensory illusions on top of my own magic, things like auditory illusions, which includes the work of Dr. Diana Deutsch, who's like the world's leading researcher in auditory illusions, tactile illusions, things like that, that really kind of point out to us very directly, that our sensory perception is really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's that was one of my questions actually, because I think that we are used to visual illusions mostly.
Right.
And I told you that I recently visited the Museum of Illusions in Chicago, and I was like, this is all great, but it's all mostly focused on our sense of vision.
Right.
So I wonder, do other types of illusions hold the same power, or are they more powerful? What do you think?
I mean, honestly, it's a mixed bag, right? Because I feel like exactly what you're saying. Culturally, we're so familiar with the prevalence of visual illusions. So I think there's something that's so inherently familiar to us that I think for some people may resonate a little bit more deeply. On the flip side, other illusions such as, tactile illusions and auditory illusions, those things, because they have a factor of novelty to them, I think may lend themselves to being a lot more surprising to people, and a lot more intriguing. So I don't know necessarily, the word, whether something is more powerful or more impactful, I think can go either way. We are sort of hyper visual creatures. So I think there's actually more flexibility to play with in terms of the impact that a visual illusion can have. But I think due to sort of the other ways in which we process sensory information, I think other sensory illusions can hold a lot of power.
Interesting. My next question is, over the years, you have mastered your pieces while also exploring the science behind human senses, right? And this is interesting because I think not every magician does that. And if you could share the most striking discoveries with event professionals, what would that be? I mean, is there anything they should know about, or any research that would help them improve events in a sensory-friendly way?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it is very much, kind of what I was speaking to earlier, in that so much of magic in terms of creating a really robust experience, even if you think of a really simple, very visual magic trick, there are a lot of other components going into it to create that experience and to create that feeling. Again, whether that be, for example, even if somebody were doing, a relatively simple card trick, you can hear the sound of cards being shuffled. You can, feel, how they feel. There's things like that actually, lend kind of credibility to what's going on and sort of create the feeling of that experience. So for me, I also have, an artistic practice. I recently completed a large, full, basically warehouse scale installation art piece, as well as coinciding performance art piece here in New York City called Taken by Artificial Surprise. And that was a lot of what kind of, I think your question is about a lot of it was sort of the experience design of, bringing the audience into the space, having them experience things, having them, experience a sequence of illusions, also progress through pieces of art. And that was a big factor in it, was really looking at, again, very basic things that we're all kind of familiar with, but what are the color palettes here? What are the music? What is the overall feel in terms of every single material that was chosen, the actual, textiles that were chosen were things that were really, really unusual. Like I used a lot of vinyl. I used latex. I was using a lot of acrylic, things that were not, typical, maybe, we had a lot of hanging curtains, so a lot of things that were not typical textiles that were used, but then really created a very different atmosphere in the space. As an aside, there's a really amazing book that was put out that I think a lot of people listening would appreciate just as much or more than I do, called Designing with Smell. And it's all about how to really create very robust sensory experiences. They looked at it. It's an academic piece. I'm like, it's on my bookcase right here. I'm tempted to grab it, but they were looking at it from, commercial and retail spaces, theatrical spaces, industrial spaces, like all different types of spatial and experience design, but designing with smell. That is what is popping to mind immediately.
Right. Thank you so much for this recommendation. I think the sense of smell is so underappreciated. And we definitely can get a lot of benefits from using it at events. Yeah. And I previously had a neuroscientist coming on the show talking about it as well. So definitely we'll put the link or the title of the book in the show notes for anyone to check. My next question is about that event that you had back in 2019. I read an article describing this performance and how those who applied to attend received a small envelope filled with black wax stamped J. And inside, there were a coin and a card, which, when scratched, gave a faint whiff of password. Yeah. And I quote here, sending the Eventbrite registration password via scratch and sniff was a strategy to create a sense of mystery, wonder, and anticipation weeks before the show. But it was also a wax-sealed pushback against impersonal mailers. Yeah. And as I read it, I thought, wow, that is something that we should do more often, because we see a lot of big, sparkly, loud galas, but creating little moments filled with strong emotions. I think is much more sophisticated approach and a more powerful way to attract attention. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. And, that was something that I've played around with in my work for a long time, was the idea of sort of expanding the time frame of what a performance or an experience can look like in terms of, that was for a piece that I did called Bottling the Impossible that was all about magic and scent and illusions and scent. And, so that was something exactly like you just said that was, sent to people weeks in advance. So it kind of built a sense of mystery and anticipation that was all very cohesive with the performance. And then the performance happened, and then people actually got a vial of scent to take home that was from the performance. So I was trying to kind of create a much longer form version of, sort of an anticipation, the event, and then a memory of the event. And so, the thing with the scratch and sniff mailers, like that was something, honestly, I have not seen that done in that way before. Honestly, I just haven't. And so that was something that I was trying to, I won't lie to you and say there were not a lot of technical hurdles in doing that. And there's definitely a lot, a lot to jump through in terms of those hoops that I didn't quite anticipate. So yeah, but I agree that I think exactly what you're speaking to, of like finding those little moments where you can create little intrigue or mystery or kind of bolstering a memory, something, those little moments where people can sort of hang their hat on a memory. A lot of times, obviously sense memories are things that I think are easier in terms of almost creating like a little linchpin that is helpful. So I think, that's something that I certainly am always really interested in doing and learning more about.
Absolutely. And I love your point about, creating the moments of anticipation and sort of cementing memories after the event. Those are two things that I think event professionals should consider more seriously, because we often are too focused on the moment of the event itself, rather than what is happening before and after. And what I always say is that, what is happening before and after sometimes is even more important for the event, for that, moment when it is already happening. But what you do before and what you do after does affect the experience at the moment. Would you agree?
Oh, entirely. Entirely. I mean, I think of personally, I think of kind of the masters of this sort of idea being Sleep No More here in New York City. If nobody's seen Sleep No More, it is the best thing you'll ever see in your life. But they're total masters at making you, like building a sense of anticipation before you go and see the performance. And then you are so immersed within the experience itself that, for example, they're a place where you can't have your phones, you can't take photos, you can't take videos. So obviously I think that's something that is a battle, sort of within contemporary events of how much do we want this happening or not? How much do you want? And I certainly experienced that for myself. My performances, are done best live. And I've obviously pieces of magic that I do virtually, but I have pieces, my main background is obviously doing live performance. So, I think having people's attention focused on live performance as opposed to if people are just photographing things, that's something, I think probably what pops to my mind is the most successful example of this I've ever seen is the artist Oliver Jeffers. And he did also a no phones event where, and they had sent out emails to you in advance saying basically there's almost like a zero tolerance policy for this. If you're not comfortable not having your phone on you, don't come. I think I have that right. This was many years ago, but, and so you had to put your phone in little lockers and then he basically did this very dramatic, painting, performance that was really powerful. I remember almost every moment of this, it was yesterday. And this was probably 6 years ago. Wow. And because I was so focused on the experience. And then at the very end, they had very tiny little Polaroids that you could take that were very small and that were sort of reminiscent of the experience. They weren't of the painting that happened. They weren't, but it was the same feel, the same visual look. And so you just had this one very small takeaway that I still have. And so I think of that as a really beautiful, cohesive, memory cemented idea of a very powerful memory that I have of an experience.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great example. Thank you. Let's talk about surprise.
Yeah.
And I think mostly, planners consider this emotion or using it as a no-brainer. But I always thought there is more to that. And I also heard you refer to the psychology of surprise as being so delicate. And I immediately realized that's exactly how I felt about it. And because event planners utilize surprise very often, I wanted to talk about the psychology of surprise in more detail.
Yeah, so surprise is something that I have been fascinated by my whole life and became very actively interested in studying in about 2019 because I realized that there are certain, I'm framing this within the lens of my own magic performance because that's really all I can do as a starting place, and then I'll move outward from there. But there are certain pieces of magic that I've performed for many years that are far more surprising than others. And I started to be really curious about why that is. And so then that started to get me into researching basically hierarchies of surprise and about how the psychology of an experience and our own backgrounds kind of factors into how we experience surprise. So for example, so there's a great research study that was done on this by Thomas Griffiths, who's a psychology researcher, and he wrote a paper. I can't believe I don't have this memorized, but I believe it's called The Ontological Commitments of Object Transformations Within Magic. And basically he's talking about how, certain materials and certain objects have qualities that are really intrinsic to them. And it's sort of changes within those intrinsic properties that create different levels of surprise or not. So like, for example, if you think about watching a magician, hypothetically change, a glass of water into a glass of milk, that's surprising. Mm-hmm. It's not as surprising as changing a glass of milk into a dove. Mm-hmm. It's probably the glass of milk to dove is also somehow feels more surprising, arguably, than like changing the glass of milk to like a dinosaur or something. Because with the glass of milk to dove, there's a similar color, there's a similar scale. The type of material is not similar, but they're both like a softness, to them. And there's like fluidity in a certain way. And then, but the level of animacy is going up. You're having a sort of what either is arguably an inanimate or semi-animate object in milk, then becoming an animate, living being. So like, there's very like, that's sort of I could talk about the psychology of surprise for like 80 hours straight, but that's sort of like a very base level. So, and then we also think about things like the relationship between surprise and then things that seem weird or things that seem eerie, and like, what is the difference there? And so, there's a great book by Mark Fisher, who's mainly an anthropologist, where he talks about, the weird, like we feel like things that are weird are things that are often sort of out of place or out of time. Like if you saw, a log sitting, like just a severed log sitting on a train, that seems weird. It's both surprising and probably weird because it's not in the right space. So there's certain different things like that are very surprising, kind of for some of those reasons. And that's the sort of thing that I find really interesting. And a lot of it is sort of my last point on this, is sort of all with this fundamental bet of expectation violation is what is at the root of a lot of these things. We have expectations about so many things around us, about the objects, about processes that we go through. I mean, even basic things like I'm going to an event tonight. I'm anticipating there to be a coat check that is going to work in a very certain way, and so if there's something really interesting that happens with that coat check that's going to totally, violate my expectation of what a coat check is, suddenly that's really interesting. And honestly, I can't think of an event I've ever been to that's had like a really interesting coat check. So, so it's like that's something that honestly I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is the one time in my life I've seen, a coat check that was, on a boat, or I don't know, so it's, so there's something, so I think there's so much about looking at like our fundamental expectations of people, behaviors, processes, spaces, objects, materials, and then how we sort of subvert those to create memorable and interesting things.
That's fascinating, right? I think even though we do use surprise in events so often, I'm listening now to you and I'm thinking that we haven't even touched on, the most, the potential of it yet, because there is so much when you look, from the angle of science of surprise,
right?
And there is so much more potential and, applications, right? Okay. Well, and talking about surprises, I can't help but ask you if you could show us a piece of magic today, because it's a video podcast, we have this opportunity.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to show you one or two quick pieces of magic. And I'll start out by showing you literally something very, very small first, because we've been talking so much about perception. And this is a very small demonstration of this using just 2 rubber bands. So I'll place one in between my fingers and turn it so it's really sort of perpendicular to the camera. And I'll drop a second one right down behind it. So it's on the, the interior here. So you can hopefully see that they're very locked together. But if you just, with a little shift just like this, they just pass right through each other.
Oh my gosh, that's
Thank you. And I have one other thing I'll share with you too that I'm actually going to pop out my headphones for, but I'll give you a little intro on it first, because this is one of my favorite pieces of magic. This is something that was shared with me from one of my early mentors, but it's also one of the oldest pieces of magic in written human history. We actually know that this goes back to 1584 at least. We can trace it back at least that far. And it uses just a couple of small items, which are a candle and a spool of thread. So bear with me.
Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. Thank you so much. This is magic. All I can say, this is magic. Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
A couple of final quick questions.
Of course.
So the first is, what would you say is the single one science insight that event professionals should apply immediately?
Honestly, really just so much of what I think about this whole conversation is just looking at, are there little moments that you can look at in your events to then implement moments of surprise? And a lot of times I think that comes through sort of a little twist in a sensory experience.
Right. And the last question is my signature question that I ask my guests at the end of every episode. So the podcast title is What If I Told You? Can you complete this sentence with any takeaway relevant to our conversation? So what if I told you?
What if I told you that it might be possible to create an event where people could hopefully spur almost a biological memory of it months or years down the road?
This is great. Thank you so much, Nat. It's just a fascinating, conversation and magical conversation, I would say. And I invite everyone to connect with Jeanette and experience her magic firsthand.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast. And for more brain science insights and for this episode recap, I invite you to join the Event Psychology Club. Also, if you want to upgrade your skills and get research-backed solutions for your events, I invite you to take the Event Psychology Lab online course that I created for event professionals like you. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.